Spider-Man does whatever a spider can, and quite a bit more in the popular character's newest video game outing in Marvel's Spider-Man. Let's talk about it. First off, Marvel's Spider-Man is notable as being the first home console Spider-Man game in nearly a decade to not be developed by Beenox Studios, who took over development from fellow Activision subsidiary Treyarch. Beenox brought us 2010 Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions, 2011 Spider-Man Edge of Time, 2012's The Amazing Spider-Man, and 2014's Amazing Spider-Man 2. While their earlier titles were met with mostly positive reviews, their later offerings were met with a mixed to mostly negative reception. That's why Spidey fans breathed a collective sigh of relief when it was revealed Marvel and Sony had agreed to partner with acclaimed and beloved developer Insomniac to bring an all-new original experience. So how did Insomniac do picking up where Beenox and Activision last left off? Let's start off with the good in Marvel's Spider-Man. The web-slinging. Spider-Man's most notable ability is his use of webbing, which he uses to wrap up enemies, but most importantly, traverse quickly above the bustling New York City streets. As we've seen in the past from previous Spider-Man games, getting the web-slinging correct is incredibly crucial. It's why Treyarch's Spider-Man 2 from 2004 and their subsequent Ultimate Spider-Man from 2005 are so indelible in the minds of fans. I'm thus very happy to report that Insomniac absolutely nailed it. Web-slinging in this game is incredibly fun. Fundamentally so. The detail and wide variance between buildings in the New York skyline, the ability to web-zip, which gives you a burst of speed while maintaining your altitude, the ability to zip to highlighted points, the ability to launch off from points, and the ability to do various tricks and stunts in the air gives the player the chance to build their own dynamic and diverse combos to cross large distances quickly. Swinging from one end of the city to the other could have very easily become tedious and repetitive, yet somehow Insomniac has managed to create an experience that never becomes tiresome. Even after unlocking the ability to fast travel, which by the way delightfully shows you a quick cutscene of Spidey riding the subway, I still found myself willing and excited to make my own way through the city's distinct districts. It's more impressive when you realize the web-slinging is also realistic, and by that, I mean the webbing doesn't just go off screen and grab onto some unknown point. You need structures to grab onto, and height makes a big difference. It's a very different experience traveling amongst the towering buildings of Lower Manhattan and traversing through the treetops of Central Park. Next up on the good, the story and characters. Marvel Spider-Man made the correct choice in avoiding being yet another origin story. Instead, it's clear that Spider-Man is already well established. We get to play as an older, post-college Peter Parker who, as Spider-Man, has already experienced going up against well-known villains. The story benefits from assuming that players are familiar with the basics of the characters and their interrelationships. That is not to say the game doesn't make some changes to make things fresh. Aunt May is given a greater role and importance actually running Feast, the city's main homeless center, which she does so tirelessly and selflessly. Mary Jane is a fiercely independent, capable journalist who shows a great deal of bravery throughout the game in her pursuit of truth and her desire to protect her beloved city. Perhaps most notably of all, J. Jonah Jameson hilariously has his arrogance and brashness turned up to 11 now that he is a podcaster and has truly committed to the role of political agitator. Insomniac has thus built upon these established characters in a way that is at the same time familiar enough while still feeling fresh and having greater influence. The game also manages to do a fantastic job interconnecting the characters, utilizing Peter Parker's relationship with Dr. Octavius and Martin Lee to dramatically and reasonably bring together other villains such as Rhino, Scorpion, Electro, Kingpin, Vulture, and more. Without going into spoiler territory, the interconnection between all these characters and their individual and also common goals is narratively very impressive and fairly seamless. There are also a lot of cameos and excellent references to characters throughout the Spider-Man franchise, but I'll let you discover them. Next up, the duality of Peter Parker and Spider-Man. One of the things that makes Spider-Man such a popular character is just how normal and down-to-earth Peter Parker is. While obviously established as being incredibly brilliant, for the most part Peter Parker is portrayed as being a pretty ordinary kid from Queens, who has relatable issues. Insomniac really seems to have understood this, as they made Peter Parker's life a consistent focus, perhaps a consistent interference. While traveling through the city to get to your next mission point, you'll be bombarded by phone calls from Aunt May asking Peter if he'll be able to drop by the homeless shelter, calls from Octavius about projects and presentations the two need to work on. Peter Parker also receives several phone calls from an irate landlord in regards to late rent. Perhaps the most notable mixing of the different worlds of Peter Parker and Spider-Man we get are the side missions involving Harry Osborn's research stations, which are positioned across the city. Harry asks Peter Parker to check these research stations since he knows Peter Parker is scientifically knowledgeable and has some expertise. Yet it will ultimately require Spider-Man's abilities to fix the problems the research stations have identified. I will also say that they absolutely nailed Spider-Man and Parker's snarky attitude, with his quips being well on point throughout the game. Next up, the combat system. I was originally worried that this Spider-Man game would take too many clues from the popular and well-received Batman Arkham series, especially when it came to the combat system. While that combat system is still somewhat similar to that of the Arkham games, it manages to be so much more. There's so much speed and fluidity in all of Spider-Man's movesets, and there's a lot more variance you can pull off between launching enemies into the air, web-slinging them either closer to you or into other enemies, disarming them. As you unlock more suits, you can unlock new powers, which adds yet more variance. It's a far more fluid, fast-paced, and varied form of the combat system seen in the Arkham series. The latter serves as more of a backbone to a much more grandiose experience. Also on the list of good, gameplay variance. Insomniac went out of their way to try to shake things up during the game. Side missions are very much varied, from car chases, finding specific locations based on just a small snapshot, to having to keep up with pigeons, stealth rescues, to even playing as different characters. There's a lot here in an attempt to keep players on their toes. As we'll discuss later, not all of it worked, but I appreciate the extra effort in trying to be inconsistent and pushing the mechanics in different ways. Last on the list of good, the Easter eggs and tiny details. Insomniac knows its audience here. There are a ton of references in this game not only to the world of Spider-Man, but also to the much larger Marvel universe. The collectible items in this game are backpacks Peter Parker has had to leave behind the many times his responsibilities of Spider-Man have gotten in the way over the years. When you find a backpack, they contain some forgotten trinket. A vial of sand from Sandman, a farewell card signed by people at the Bugle, which includes a signature from Eddie Brock, a hat from Peter Parker's days of delivering pizzas. While yes, it doesn't make sense that Peter Parker would manage to forget about 55 backpacks, or that the webbing would remain after as long as 6 years, especially since they are designed to dissolve in about a day, it's still super fun. Peter Parker's love and skill in photography comes into play as there is a side mission to take pictures of city landmarks, which include Avengers Tower, the Wakanda Embassy, as well as the Sanctum Sanctorum, home of Doctor Strange. Spider-Man can also give the obligatory finger gun greeting to denizens a la Tobey Maguire's tenure as Spider-Man. There's also a tremendously brilliant Inhumans reference and a very subtle Ghostbusters Easter egg. It's clear that Insomniac has a lot of love for the world of Marvel, as witnessed by the incredible detail they put into the game. There was clearly also a lot of detail put into getting New York right. Many buildings, such as the Empire State Building, are recreated perfectly. And while licensing and sensitivity issues may have prevented an exact copy of the Freedom Tower, there is a close proximity. Even the High Line, the former railroad track turned elevated park, is represented in the game. If you decide to go down to street level, you'll find that almost all the city streets are named and in their correct positions, although I did notice what looked like minor condensing of streets in Greenwich. Overall, a lot of detail was given to get the city right, and as a Long Islander, that's appreciated. So, was Spider-Man perfect? Unfortunately, not quite. Here comes the first point on the bed. F*** the Mary Jane stealth missions. In theory, giving players a chance to play other characters in a Spider-Man game feels like a great, novel idea. I was pretty taken aback when I found myself in control of Mary Jane. Unfortunately, that surprise quickly dissolved into sadness. The stealth missions featuring Mary Jane are very seldom fun or interesting. They're not particularly hard, but may take a few tries to get your timing right, moving a few steps at a time, pushing over a toolbox, etc., etc. They're really not fun. They are the opposite of fun. They are a tremendous diversion from the fun you were just having playing as Spider-Man. Again, I think the concept is good, but the execution was, for the most part, not there. There are a few instances where you also get to play as Miles Morales, which tend to be a little bit more involved and a little bit more interesting, but again, meh. While we're angry and cursing, let's move on to our next point. The Taskmaster. A good way through the game, Taskmaster appears and challenges Spider-Man to complete various, tasks. Go figure. Based mostly on how fast you complete the tasks, you will be given a score that will translate to a rank of bronze, silver, or gold. While the combat and stealth missions are easy to get top ranks in, there are other tasks that require you to follow drones closely while also picking up spy cameras. These missions. I strongly feel like the traversal mechanics are not precise enough to facilitate getting top ranks in a way that is not extraordinarily frustrating. It's really fucking frustrating. Other missions require you to get to 3 locations with bombs and web them up before they can cause harm. These are slightly easier than the drone missions. However, I found myself doing the same exact thing over and over again, and getting vastly different scores each time. I'm very confident that there is something fundamentally off with the way these challenges are graded. As something of a completionist, it was terribly annoying not being able to get top ranks in what felt like an arbitrary grading system. Thankfully, you don't have to get top ranks in all the missions to unlock anything in-game, or to unlock a trophy. However, you will have to get gold status in some to be able to afford unlocking some of the different Spider-Man suits. And last on the list of bad, the glitches. Marvel Spider-Man is very impressive considering all the calculations it's doing at once and the amount of detail it has. That being said, I ran into a few more glitches than what I feel is common for a first-party AAA title. In one instance, a pedestrian just started floating up the side of a building, I assume doing their best Spider-Man impersonation, only to disappear once they reached the top. I was able to knock a few enemies into walls where they then got stuck. I had the game crash on me twice, and I had the final boss glitch on me where they were unable to be hit and unable to move, forcing me to restart my save file. These issues seem to become more prevalent as the game progresses, so perhaps it's just a matter of time before they are alleviated by patches, but it still left a slightly sour taste. So what score are we giving Marvel Spider-Man? It gets a very impressive 9 out of 10. Insomniac's turn with the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man is truly a fun time. From web-slinging across the city, to the exciting combat, to the amount of references, throwbacks, and details they managed to incorporate, it's almost a shame that relatively small things were able to add up to prevent a perfect score. It also perhaps wasn't groundbreaking enough, building on and perhaps perfecting a lot of the successes of previous Spider-Man games and others of the genre. So that's our review. Let us know what you thought of the game, what you liked, and what you may have disliked about the game. If you enjoyed this review, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more.